um the allotted format? Like, what is it, 2 or 3 per day or no? All right, cool. So then let's do that. Let me um let me get started, and then I'll hit you right back. Cool. Okay. Thank you. God bless. So, microphone in. Yes. All right. So we are one with the matrix. Give me one quick second. As you know, official test start time 2 minutes. 5 pages, 5 paragraphs each. 5 words per sentence. 5 sentences per paragraph. 5 computer spaces in between. You can use your hyperscientific, you can use any artificial intelligence, you can use any technology, but you must show the work and share it with the class. If you do not show the work and share it with the class, I'm going to assume all you did was use technology, you will get zero credit for it. Cool? Cool beans. Top of the morning, Mr. Clarence. Always good to see you, man. How you doing, man? God bless. Um, Dios lo bendiga. What was I gonna say? Okay, so I'm trying to see how we can move forward. Let's see what's going on. Let's start the day with the markets. Go Bloomberg, go YouTube, go to the channel, go videos, and we're gonna start. Oh, wait a minute. There's a 4 hour gap. What the heck's happening?
That's the sound of an American oil company hard at work. Want to be a part of it? Listen up. Hello.
We'll have a moment of reflection.
This is Asia Trade. I'm Shirian in Tokyo.
Yeah, enjoy it.
I'm April Hong in Singapore. The top stories this hour. Asian stocks set for a negative open as traders assess tensions between the US and Europe over Greenland. A Supreme Court ruling on many of Trump's earlier tariffs could come as soon as Tuesday. Japan's prime minister puts her job on the line, setting February 8th for a snap election and promising a temporary sales tax cut on food if re-elected. Plus, we begin our coverage of the World Economic Forum in Davos, hearing from the IMF chief, as well as the CEOs of Franklin Templeton and Mitsui OSK.
Open up your
And
bar.
we're coming off a global risk-off session. U.S. markets were closed, but we saw futures under pressure. The European stock 600 saying its worst day since about 2 months or so in November. Not to mention that gold has now hit a record high, and we're continuing to see the Japanese yen gaining against the U.S. dollar. Those safe haven moves at that 158 level against the greenback. We're also following Nikkei futures at the moment under pressure after 3 sessions of losses. But what was interesting in the Japanese market was the fireworks in the JGB space, because we're at record highs on those yields when it comes to the 10-year, 20-year yield at a high that we haven't seen since 1999 on expectations of more government spending, as we have that early election now set for February 8th. Take a look at how the offshore yuan is trading at that 695 level against the U.S. dollar, extending those gains that we saw in the past 8 weeks against the U.S. dollar, which of course has been under pressure, and in fact seeing its worst day since December on those concerns about the geopolitics surrounding Greenland. And we are now expecting those loan prime rates set by commercial banks. Today, we had seen some more optimism in the Chinese market after we saw those GDP numbers for last year actually achieving its 5% target. But of course, it's always a caveat with what happens with the future economy in China and whether policymakers will step in to do more. Yeah, Sherry, you talk about the uptick in long end yields in Japan. It'll be interesting to see how cash trading for treasuries fares in the next hour. This would be the first time we're seeing them move following from Greenland tariff threats from the US president. For the moment, you talked about how US stock futures are down. It's worth noting among stocks Europe 600, yes, this was a really bad day, but it is coming off those near record highs. That being said, among the sectors that were the hardest hit, we saw those that were exposed to the US that were affected. So that includes the automakers and luxury related stocks. And if you look at gold, it's hard to see at these record highs a way in which they will retreat given the geopolitical backdrop. It's also worth noting, and it's easy to forget with everything going on, that it's a year since Trump's inauguration. And look at this chart on your right, it shows you how the dollar hasn't really recovered from Liberation Day just yet, Sherry. And we continue to follow, of course, everything that President Trump is doing, especially around Greenland. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says that he's trying to persuade French President Emmanuel Macron to tone down his response to President Trump's threats to impose new trade tariffs on European allies. Macron is said to be eyeing the activation of the European Union's anti-coercion instrument.
We are constantly experiencing new provocations. We are constantly experiencing new antagonism, which President Trump is seeking, and we Europeans must make it clear that the limit has been reached. All of this shows what a period of upheaval we are currently living in. The logical consequence for me is very clear. We must make Europe stronger. We must do so much faster than is currently the case.
Let's bring in Bloomberg's UN reporter Magdalena Del Valle. Magdalena, it seems to be that Europe is divided in terms of Germany and France and its composition of its economy and its reliance on exports when it comes to using this tool.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I mean, Germany and France definitely have different philosophies for how they want to approach Trump's threats, but I mean, across the continent, the Europeans are not happy with this move. I mean, it's especially jarring for them when you think about the fact that the EU and the US have been allies for a very, very long time. They've usually been able to work together and work diplomatically to resolve any issues. So the Europeans are all very upset, from Germany to France to the UK. I mean, Keir Starmer called Trump's comments completely wrong. Sweden's prime minister said that his country shouldn't be blackmailed. And the EU is already discussing different things that they might do. They might impose tariffs on 93 billion euros worth of US goods if Trump doesn't back down. And of course, there is the reaction from President Macron, which was definitely the strongest. He wants to use the biggest tool that the EU has in its arsenal to fight back against these threats. He wants to activate the EU's anti-coercion instrument, which could mean new fees on EU imports of US goods, charges on services by the US tech giants and other companies, curbs on US investments in Europe, or even a ban on American firms bidding for public contracts. Of course, Merz from Germany is looking to get Macron to tone down this reaction, as the German economy, as you said, relies very heavily on exports, and this measure would be very bad for them and very bad for a lot of other countries in Europe as well. But that doesn't mean that Germany isn't concerned about Trump's threats and these tariffs. I mean, just earlier, Germany's finance minister did say that Trump had reached a red line. So I do think the Europeans agree that something needs to be done about this, but just how they do it, they're probably going to need to discuss a little bit further.
As a small business owner, you need a tax service that lets you focus on your business. Try TurboTax Experts for Business. Your industry-matched expert will help you find every tax break. Plus, you'll get audit protection at no extra cost. Visit TurboTax.com.
I'm David Lichtenstein. I founded Lightstone in 1986. And one key guiding principle is that there's a difference between investment and speculation. I've been in business for almost 40 years, and we've accumulated a portfolio of over $12 billion AUM. We have 25,000 multifamily units. We're the top owners of multifamily in the United States. We have
25,000.
12 million square feet of industrial space.
12
And we have
million.
over 5,000 hotel keys. Real estate, you're buying an asset, sometimes two assets. And it's pretty much easy.
Just how they do it, they're probably going to need to discuss a little bit further.
How is Trump going to approach all this at Davos? What's on his agenda?
Trump has a very packed agenda at Davos this year. I mean, of course, Greenland is going to be a major topic of conversation. He's been talking about the U.S. owning Greenland since 2019, and now the issue has finally gained a lot of momentum. He's been emboldened by the successful raid in Venezuela, and so he's now coming from a major position of strength that he can probably try to leverage at the conference and during his conversations in Switzerland. However, they don't want all the conversation in Switzerland to revolve around this, and Finland's president, Alexander Stubb, even said he's worried that this crisis will suck all of the oxygen out of the conference and steer attention away from Ukraine. So perhaps Trump will be able to discuss Ukraine and other peace deals, which was a big focus for him last year. But he has said that another major goal of his at Davos isn't actually related to Greenland or Ukraine. It's actually more in the Middle East. He wants to establish the Board of Peace, which is part of his 20-point plan for a solution in Gaza. And what this means is that he wants to get a constitution for the Board of Peace, and he wants the role for this group to be really defined all by Thursday, which is a pretty lofty task. I mean, already he has sent out invitations to world leaders who would join the board, and a lot of them have been invited, like Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, the President of Turkey, the President of Brazil. He even invited Putin, but there's still a lot of hurdles that he needs to tackle in order for these countries to sign on. I mean, for starters, Trump is asking members to pay $1 billion for permanent membership. So there's a lot of different hurdles.
Magdalena, thank you for a very comprehensive look at the state of play here. Bloomberg UN reporter Magdalena Del Valle for us. Now, talking about the market reaction now, because the standoff between the US and Europe comes against the backdrop of resilient earnings, AI spending, keeping investors optimistic, and then you have the Supreme Court decision on Trump's tariffs. That's also possible as soon as Tuesday. Let's bring in our executive editor for Asia Markets, Paul Dobson. So, Paul, we watched the action in the past, day and a half, and to me, it didn't look that bad. I don't know, what is your assessment of this, and our market's working on the assumption of an off-ramp amid all this?
Yeah, so like you say, could be worse perhaps, but that's, we've got the caveat that the US wasn't open, so it can still be worse as well. I think people are waiting to see what Europe's response is and what sort of an escalation we get from them, whether they're willing to tough this out and raise the stakes, or whether they will look to negotiate as soon as possible. At the moment, the signs are, that there's going to be some kind of countermeasures. We have like Macron saying, hold me back, with the German Chancellor sort of trying to restrain him. But there's a lot of stage management going on there, no doubt as well. I think, the other thing is that people have seen this show so many times now. We know the way that it works. He escalates in order to de-escalate and to get people around the table. The market's been burned too many times by having an extreme sell-off on the first headlines, and then once it realizes and comes back again, the people that were the first to react tend to be the ones with the egg on their face. So I think that the market is a little bit cautious not to get too carried away too quickly, but there are signs of nerves out there, right? Not least the rally in precious metals, but also more generally the dollar weakness, which I think is something, that we've seen a few times now where people have been expressing that, and maybe a sort of longer term cloud that hangs over the US, however this might be resolved.
Paul, talking about things that we have seen before and deja vu, that feeling that we get when we see geopolitical tensions and trade issues just spark up. We always talk about the weaponizing of capital, right? I remember with China and the US, we're talking about how much U.S. treasuries Beijing owns. We have a similar narrative right now for how many trillions of dollars of stocks and U.S. bonds the Europeans own. Is this a problem?
I do think that it's interesting, Sherry, to have a think about that. You know, the one weapon that Europe has that it could deploy is this amount of US assets that are held by European governments and companies, not just US treasuries, but also US stocks. If they were to put some kind of caps on, say, how much pension funds are allowed to invest in US markets, for example, or change the rules, you know, for the example of Norwegian's pension funds, you know, and see a reduction in the US holdings, particularly on the debt side, that might start to cause some problems for US markets in the short term, which could put a little bit of pressure back in the Trump cause. So I think that that's interesting, but it also seems that most people think that's a pretty unlikely scenario for a couple of reasons. One, it's quite hard to control those capital. Two, if you do that and if you signal it, you know, the problem is it's also going to hurt the rest of your holdings. So you're going to inflict some pain on yourselves as well as the rest of the world. And three, you know, who knows, it could set off quite an unforeseeable chain of events from there and may not be worth it. But it wouldn't be a bad thing, you know, some of the strategists that we've spoken to are saying, to remind Trump that that is something that's out there. And you know, these are things that people are working through at the moment. How can Europe respond? What's the best way of calibrating a response? I think, you know, there's also the possibility that things could be resolved in a pretty decent way here. You know, Greenland has probably been neglected. I don't think that Trump is completely wrong here. It does have resources that could be exploited. You know, pointing this out to Europe and trying to get them to do a little bit more on this, you know, reminding them again of the grudges about the defense spending that the US has been putting a disproportionate amount into the pot. Not all bad things. So there are ways that maybe Europe can take this on board and can move forwards from here that helps markets in the longer term.
Paul, thanks very much. Our Bloomberg Executive Editor for Asia Markets, Paul Dobson. Coming up on the Asia Trade, we'll talk market strategy with OCBC's Vasu Menon. Plus, a look at what the US-EU tensions mean for Asia Pacific with a former Australian ambassador to the US. Much more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
Wouldn't cut a check with a chainsaw. So why use a card that's not meant for contractors? Get the right tool for the job and switch to CoastPay. Contractors use CoastPay to authorize materials and fuel spending, manage expenses, and close their books faster. Try CoastPay today with no contracts or commitments. It's must-know info from Credit Karma about getting approved for a credit card or a loan. Most people don't realize your credit score is only part of the equation. Credit Karma's approval odds technology goes way beyond, scanning real factors lenders use, digging into thousands of data points, and looking at your unique financial profile to match you with offers you're most likely to get, so you can make the right calls to reach your money goals. Tapping apply and feeling great, that's Karma you can count on. Sign in to see your approval odds now.
Take a look at how Japanese assets are setting up for the market opens after 3 sessions of losses for Japanese stocks. We're seeing Nikkei futures under pressure and the Japanese yen holding steady. We saw some gains on those safe haven moves with the global risk-off session, but right now we're holding at that 158 level. What will be interesting to watch today will be the GGB space, though. Remember, 10-year and 20-year yields at the highest level since 1999 and 30 and 40-year yields at the highest since their debuts ever. So there's a lot of expectation of more fiscal spending, and we finally have a date now for the early election. That will be February 8th. The caveat, though, for investors will be the election outcome. The complete outcome is always in the air, right? The Komeito party has moved to align with the main opposition party, so the details might be difficult to confirm. Let's bring in our economy and government reporter Yoshiaki Nohara for more on the state of Japanese politics. But right now, Yoshi, it seems investors are cheering the fact that we might see those temporary sales tax cuts on food if the Prime Minister's coalition wins. What exactly are we expecting to happen?
Right. So, the talking point right now is, as you mentioned, the food
items for sales tax. And Prime Minister said that she proposes to exclude food items from sales tax for 2 years. But the thing is that everybody else is calling for food tax cut to zero or more or less to a lower level. So everybody's calling for tax cut. So that means that there's justifiable that there's some concerns about fiscal situations in Japan, and therefore we're seeing the rise in long-term bond yields, which is not surprising at all.
Yeah, not forgetting we have a 20-year JGB auction today as well. What is your sense of the pressure on the long end and how that, along with the yen volatility, might actually turn out to be a political issue for Takaichi?
There's it's a very clear dynamics going on in the market. So markets is clearly sending signals about what they think about what this election could be. Meaning that, as you mentioned, that the yen, it's coming back a little bit, strengthening a little bit, but still highly, we're at a weak level, and the authorities here have been issuing warnings about its weakness. But at the same time, you see a consistent pressure on upward pressure for long-term yields here, and especially 10-year yield bonds yields. When they go up, that's going to affect people's livelihoods because it's linked to the mortgage rates that people are going to have to pay when they decide to buy houses here. So that's a big deal for regular people, not just investors.
Yeah, we'll be watching how the Bank of Japan will react this Friday with their policy. And of course, some people are now saying that although the consensus might be that they might hike in July in the summer, that they might bring forward that rate hike given the weakness of the Japanese yen. But something that I mentioned earlier, Yoshi, that I'm also curious about, the fact that the Komeito party has aligned now with the main opposition party, does this change the calculus and makes things a little bit more difficult to predict?
Sure. The uncertainty is the word we have to embrace here. It's very difficult, even though I go through reports and check everything that I can to find out what would be the ramifications of this the kind of changing coalition partners here. But it's so very difficult to see how this change is going to affect the outcome, especially because of the fact that the Komeito is decided to form an alliance with the largest opposition. But we don't know yet which is going to be the key battlegrounds for this election in terms of the battle between the ruling coalition and the new party formed by opposition parties. It's hard to know, really. Yeah.
Yoshiaki, we'll leave it there for now. Always great to get your insights. Thanks so much. Bloomberg's economy and government reporter Yoshiaki Nohara. Now, the CEO of Japanese shipping giant Mitsui O.S.K. says the company is seeing signs of gradual stabilization after what he describes as a very difficult 2025. Takeshi Hashimoto spoke to us from Davos about the geopolitical and trade risks he's watching.
MicroStrategy Incorporated doing business and strategy script that requires another 20,305 Bitcoin for $2.1 billion in cash between January 12th and January 18th. And an average price of $95,224 per Bitcoin. But Securities and Exchange SEC filing short on Tuesday. According to the company's filing, the transaction was financed with proceeds from the sales of shares of under its at-the-market offering program strategy. Strategy sold 10,399,650 of Class A common stock last week for $1.8 billion, as well as 2,945,371.
25 was a very, very difficult year
Strategy
for us.
Incorporated variable rate
Particularly for the
savings
second
rate
half of
stretch
the
preferred
25,
shares for
we observed that the situation is
strategy to 8% Series A perpetual strike
at the moment,
preferred stock for
our
3.4
sentiment
million.
is relatively
Strategy
optimistic
stated that as of
about
January
the future
19th,
of
total Bitcoin holdings stood at 790,715 Bitcoins.
particularly for
The
the
aggregate
Middle East
purchase cost
situation,
for the assets
Ukraine
is
situations, and
approximately
also that lots of
83.9 billion, with an average
trade
price of
tensions between US and other
75,979
countries.
per Bitcoin,
So far,
including
and
fees and
we can
expenses.
adjust
So at my
ourselves.
2017 rate,
There
that
are
would have
global
been
trade
about
choke
2,000
points and the
Bitcoins
Strait of Hormuz
per
is
year.
one of them.
2-3
What's your
years
overall
ago.
reading?
What's your math?
Is the risk
Alright, we're
rising
gonna shut
or
it down.
easing at
We
this
gotta
stage?
go meet up
We
with the
cannot
family.
ignore the risk.
Before they
At the
do that, we're
moment,
gonna beat them there.
all
We'll be
trade,
right back. Dreams come true. Prepare. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for the blessings in our lives. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for the
so many
blessings in our lives.
vessels,
We worry not about what we don't have because we're in the process of getting
LNG
it.
carriers,
And that journey,
that are very
everything we do is in
important
it.
for the,
Amen. Amen.
the global
May you have
business.
an amazing
And
day today.
of
May you
course,
conquer everything
we
you
have
have,
some concern
everything you
about
touch turn to solid
the
gold
political
bars
situation in
and
Iran
beautiful and precious
and the
gemstones such
action
as
of
moissanite
the
or
US,
laboratory grown
Israel,
diamonds
etc.
or any naturally
So
grown
far, it
diamonds,
should
and
be
even
alright.
silver
People
bars.
talk about the
Always
possibility
remember
of
to
a
dream
regime
big because
change in
dreams
Iran. Would that
come true.
encourage you to
Happen to me,
invest
and I know
more?
for a fact
What would
it's
it
gonna
take for
happen
you
to
to
you.
do that?
Yeah, very
Conquer
difficult
everything you have to. Have an
question,
amazing
but
day. We'll be right back
regime
in a
change
few minutes.
cannot happen overnight, and it will